Hi folks, welcome. If you don't know me, my name is Freya Serafina, and I am a PhD candidate in women's spirituality. What I like to look at are women's hidden histories and mysteries and rituals, and I also like to look at what some people call alternative spiritualities. I don't think they are alternative at all. I'm often speaking from a pagan, goddess centered, indigenous cultural lens. I'm very interested in spiritual and cultural reclamation. And I think a lot of that can happen through ritual and ceremony and recreating these things in modern times. Now, I also am an ally for many, many people. And that's what this video is about today. Now, I want to preface this video with a few things. One, the way that we understand the word or definition, or maybe even identity of transgender in this day and age, is probably not streamline applicable for how individuals, whom I'm going to talk about today, would categorize themselves. You know, a lot of the language that we use today has been around for a really long time, but not like ancient times, long time. But people and their identities certainly have been. And so we find ourselves having to use different language to describe something that's been in existence for time immemorial. Also, I am a religious studies scholar, religion and philosophy, but I am not a biblical scholar, for example. I don't do like deep-seated religious textual work, translations, things like that. And so I'm relying on the work of other scholars whom I'm citing below to do that work for me. What I am, what I would consider myself a specialist or a specialist in training in, is seeing the nuance and the symbols and the signs and the depictions and understanding what has happened, why it's happened, and what purpose this erasure, this minimization has had on women in particular, but people in general, and society as a whole. I also want to say that while I am queer, I am a cis woman, and I'm speaking of an identity that is outside of myself. And so if I misstep, I do apologize. I'm presenting a presentation today on something I researched and studied over the course of only a few months. So this is the information that I've gathered during that time. Now, I see it all over the place, right? Ooh, my drink, I hit it. And I do a lot of reading, and I do a lot of like theorizing around many different topics and many different things, and this is one of them. But my actual focus is more so on ritual and ceremony and the elements of that, and how ritual can contribute to healing and community building and, you know, reclaiming sacred identities and undoing harm that has happened. That is applicable for this conversation. But I just want to provide those caveats, if you will, because there could be a scholar whose focus is this very particular thing that I'm talking about. And maybe you, dear scholar, dear researcher, have more information than I do, or a different perspective, or a more nuanced approach. Please do comment below and share that with us. Share those resources with us so that we can be more informed, myself included. I digress. I gave this presentation that I'm doing now as an actual workshop talk and presentation a couple of years ago at New Women's Space in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It was a lot of fun. I loved doing it. And that video is circulating somewhere on this channel. But I don't think I ever formally posted it. And as I was thinking about the kinds of things that I'd like to talk about on this channel, I'm thinking about very deeply the kinds of things that are going on in the world. And that's sort of why I started this channel to begin with, is that there is so much hatred and violence, colonial, imperial, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, racist. I mean, I could just go on and on. And the people in power, there seems like there's no repercussions for their actions. And that's really fucking depressing. And if you, like me, are feeling hopeless and scared and deeply, deeply disturbed and depressed, I just want you to know that you're not alone and that you are not powerless, actually. There are lots of practices that you can do for yourself in your community. And yes, while I am talking about spiritual and or magical practices, I don't just mean that. There are little things that we can do to take care of each other that take us outside of the spiritual realm. Are you a person who's able to donate some food, donate some time? Can you provide childcare for someone on an afternoon? Can you share books and resources? Can you call someone to check in on them and just make sure that they're okay? There are a lot of things that we can be doing for each other, and it doesn't have to cost money, because that's hard. It's really hard right now. So I am going to be moving forward. I had this plan of focusing a lot on what the dissertation is doing, and that's important, and I am going to talk about that, because what I'm doing for my dissertation leads into all these things that we can do for each other, and why that matters, and why healing matters. And I'm sorry that I keep touching my hair, but I haven't washed it in 2 days and I feel gross, and I almost didn't come on here, but showing up matters. And so this presentation is important, because if you are a person who is being told that there's something wrong with you because of who you are, because of your identity, or if you're a person who thinks that these identities are just showing up now, it's the trans agenda, I want to educate you. I want to inform you. And I'm only using a very small selection of data to do so. There is a lot more out there. So again, if this is your area of expertise, share your knowledge with us. Help to continue to build community. And I will do the same. So, because this is originally a presentation, PowerPoint and everything, that's how I'm going to present it to you. This is my lecture on transgender identities in the ancient world. Sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy. Okay, let's dig into this. This is Transgender Identities in the Ancient World by Freya Serafina. This is what we're going to be looking at. This is our agenda. I wish that little figurine was a photo of me. So we're going to be looking at the artwork of ancient Crete, the cult of Cybele and Attis, Inanna and her devotees, and Moses, Jesus, John, and the Reed people. Let's get into it. Oh, but first, my standpoint. I mentioned this a little bit. So if someone is not a scholar, for example, it's really important that you always sort of name your positionality and where you're coming from. And that's what I did here. This is when I was still a student instead of a candidate. But I am a bisexual, cisgendered woman and ally to the transgender community. My background is in theater and film. I'm a PhD candidate in religion philosophy with a focus on women's spirituality. I'm a pagan, goddess-worshipping ex-Catholic. I love to decolonize and dismantle patriarchal religious and spiritual institutions and structures, shed light on forgotten and erased information, and move towards gender equality. Wow, I was pretty badass when I wrote this, huh? All right. Gender transgression and non-binary identities are not a new phenomenon. No way, baby. In fact, multi-gendered identities can be traced back to ancient civilizations such as Crete, Phrygia, Sumer, and beyond. Ancient gods, goddesses, and their devotees have long since transformed beyond the boundaries of modern-day constructed gender to wage mighty wars, generate life, and participate in religious rites and rituals. The fear and hatred in so-called modern society is a direct symptom of colonial practices that sought to eradicate pre-existing deities and supplant patriarchal, monotheistic deities in their stead. An exploration of the history of gender transgression among deities and devotees can reveal how decolonizing religion could help provide us with a path towards gender equality. So, we'll be looking at a great deal of iconography or imagery, along with literary evidence. But how? Let me make sure. I gotta check out. Look at that. But how do we know the difference? How do we know what we're looking at when we look at ancient frescoes or any other kind of artwork? And how do we know the difference between men and women? Dun, dun, dun. I'm going to go back there in a minute. So, the men are typically dressed in a kind of loincloth and are shirtless, and the women are in dresses. Additionally, women are typically painted with white skin and men with tan or dark skin in the ancient world. There are some variations on this, like blue skin with dealing with gods or the dead. But Mary Ann Everly, an associate professor of classics and former chair of the Department of Classics at the University of Florida, tells us that, quote, one of the most obvious stylistic features of Athenian black figure vase painting is the use of color to differentiate women from men. In her book, Tan Men / Pale Women, Color and Gender in Archaic Greece and Egypt, A Comparative Approach, she contemplates the use of color in both Greece and Egypt through the lens of gender and racial equality, finding that the depiction of women with pale skin and men with tan skin was a common practice throughout the ancient world. Therefore, when we find a palace fresco that shows tan figures donning feminine clothing, we have to pause and wonder. Here are some examples of what I am talking about. Okay, so here you can see on the left, pale skin, white skin, breasts are out. Here we've got tan skin, loincloths, okay. Here we've got the Cretan snake goddess, pale skin. Here we've got Egypt, right? Paler skin. Women, we see some breasts. Men, darker skin, loincloth, right? Down here. And I'll let you take in that a little bit. terracotta. Yeah, look at that. You see? You can even see it here. Pale skin, darker skin. Even the horses are gendered here. Yeah, this is from the Met. I took it off their website. Yeah, you can see the different colors, right? Interesting, interesting. All right, let's dig into Crete. Crete is a fascination to scholars across many fields for its rich artistic culture, egalitarian or matrilineal society, and lack of evidence pertaining to war or warlike culture. There is both textual and archaeological evidence that highlights Crete's reputation for cultivating a harmonious and lavish culture keen to be connected with nature and the mother goddess. According to Dr. Mara Keller, the ancient names for the island of Crete include Macharis, country of the blessed, and Chthoniya, the name for the earth mother goddess herself. Keller tells us that Homer described Crete in the Odyssey as lavishly fruitful and radiant. Additionally, Pliny, the Roman naturalist, stated that the animal and plant life found on Crete was incomparably better than anywhere else, end quote. Along with exclamations of Crete's rich landscape and nature comes accounts of rich architecture and artwork, including the still standing palaces and accompanying frescoes. I should have looked at this presentation first. There's a palace. There you go. Look at that. The Palace of Knossos was a central community complex for those living in ancient Crete. The palace remnants were discovered by excavator Sir Arthur Evans in 1900. According to Dr. Marlon Keller, the handful of palaces on Crete, including at Knossos, quote, were several stories tall, with grand entrances, elaborate exteriors, many workrooms, storage chambers, many shrines, and a large central courtyard. The palace was used as a center of the arts, commerce, and ritual worship. Inside the palace, one could find private rooms and dwellings, along with miniature sculptures of animals, flowers, and humans. Researchers have also found stone, silver, and bronze vessels, jewelry, and golden pendants. Most significantly, to my mind. Hey, look at that. I lost my place. Oh, no. Here it is. Most significantly, I just gave you time to look at the pictures, that's all. Most significantly, to my mind, are the frescoes left behind by the ancient artists. A fresco known as the Great Procession can be found in a passageway known as the Corridor of Procession in the Palace of Knossos and contains 3 elements that all speak to goddess worship. Isn't that beautiful? Look at the color. Oh, to be a bull fighting in Crete. There's the procession. The corridor takes its name from the images depicted in the procession. Part A of the procession shows men dressed as women playing various instruments following a woman who is clapping her hands. Here's A. Now, why do I know that? Dark skin, dresses, following this woman clapping her hands, okay? Part B shows men gathered around a woman in a headdress, which is usually meant to depict the goddess or a priestess embodying the goddess. See? As they praise her with their hands up. Part C shows men carrying vessels, typically referred to as libation bearers. Do I have this broken up? Yeah, here we go. Here's part A, you see that? I love also that many of the eyes are sort of like off to the side, like they're looking at you. They're looking at you like through the ages, you know? They're like, see what we're doing? And I also want to point out the instruments, because if I'm a smart person, I've talked about this later. So these, we see a lot of these in ancient Egypt. We see these symbols as well when we get to like Moses and stuff. So I'm just pointing that out. Yeah, look at that. So my assertion is that the men depicted in the procession fresco are actually men in service to the goddess, or Gali, as they are known in Anatolia. In the modern tongue, these men dress as women, taking on the roles and attributes of women, would be considered transgender or maybe non-binary. These images, along with various documentation from the ancient world, depict a world full of devotees who transgressed the boundaries of gender as a religious practice. I want to point this out. Here are a ton of men dressed as women. And we can see these priestess figures sitting. And check it out. Not all of them have white skin. Yeah, see? Accepting a libation. Oh yeah, let's look at that. The jumping of the bull at Knossos. So this is interesting, right? So we have a man in a loincloth on the bull, but then we have two women dressed as men wrangling the bull. Now, the jumping of the bull is like a whole other thing that many scholars have done a lot of research on, so I'm not going to get too much into it here. But there's this like incredible gender parity between like these really athletic and what someone might consider to be more, masculine things, and women doing it. And this is just like a great example, because a lot of those examples we just looked at are mainly men being in service of the goddess, and here we have that reversed. Okay, let me get my face out of the way. Here we go. Moving on to Phrygia, or Anatolia. So the Gali were priests devoted to the Phrygian or Anatolian goddess Cybele. Phrygia is located in central Anatolia, which is now modern-day Turkey. The main goddess cult in ancient Phrygia was dedicated to both Cybele and Attis. The tale of Attis is a sad one, and it begins with the R word of his grandmother. Cybele, by the god Jupiter. Which god commits the act changes from culture to culture, but it happens nonetheless. I think I'm blocking her face. I'll do this. Cybele gave birth to the demon Agdistis, who caused great destruction until the gods castrated him. The blood that spilled onto the earth caused an almond tree to grow. The goddess, Nana, ate the fruit of the almond tree and gave birth to Attis 10 months later. Nana cast Attis aside, but instead of succumbing to death as an infant, he grew to be a beautiful boy loved and revered by mortals. Cybele pined for Attis, and upon hearing of his betrothal to another, drove him to madness. Attis ran through the mountains, stopping at a pine tree before castrating himself and killing himself. Real nice bedtime story, right? Instead of letting his body decay, both the pine tree and Cybele tended to it, allowing for Attis's resurrection. From this myth, the cult of Cybele and Attis was born and solidified in a yearly festival that reenacted and honored the castration, purification, and resurrection of Attis's body over a 3-day cycle. Hey, wait a second. Doesn't that sound kind of like lots of other stuff? So I also want to mention, though I cannot give you concrete evidence for this one, and maybe someone else in the comments can, that when more patriarchal forces, more warlike cultures made their way into more matrilineal goddess-focused cultures, the myths also change to reflect more violence, bloodshed, war, and a lot of like incest. And I am not surprised by any of the stuff we're seeing today with the files, right? Because patriarchy has been doing that since time immemorial. But I digress. This is why it's important to study these things, to know. Throughout the ancient world, there were various temples, rituals, and poems dedicated to the cult of Attis. Latin poet Catullus wrote what is now called Poem 63 during the 1st century BCE. In it, he recounts the story of Attis along with his frenzied madness and eventual castration. Catullus tells us that by emasculating himself through the act of castration, Attis becomes a counterfeit woman. Upon waking the next morning, Attis's gender is automatically shifted from he to she. Do I have this here? Yes, great. Upon waking, in a translation of the poem from C.H. Sisson, Catullus states, "Carried in a fast ship over profound seas, Attis, eager and hurried, reached the Phrygian grove, the goddess's dark places, crowned with woodland, and there, exalted by amorous rage, his mind gone, he cut off his testicles with a sharp flint. She then, aware of her limbs, without the man, while the ground was still spotted with fresh blood, quickly took in her snowy hands the tambourine," what did I show you earlier, "such as serves your initiates, Cybele." Should I go back to the picture of the devotees to the goddess in Crete with the tambourine? Just remember I said that, the tambourine. "Such as serves your initiates, Cybele." After transforming himself into a woman, Attis then takes up the tambourine as a galley and becomes a, quote, "slave of Cybele." The Galli were representative of Attis as they too castrated themselves as a symbol of reunification with the great mother Cybele. What we know of the meaning behind the roles of the Galli, along with their rites and rituals, is given to us from many different written sources that sought to defame pagan activities and demonize goddess worship. But we have the evidence all the same. Arnobius of Sicca, a convert to Christianity, wrote 7 books at the end of the 3rd century CE titled Against the Pagans. In it, he detailed the myth of Attis, making sure to infuse the tale with blood, terror, incest, female breast mutilation, castration, death, and more. It's like Game of Thrones, but completed. These depictions of pagans as violent, frenzied mutilators who worshipped gods who raped and lusted after their own grandchildren was a definitive way to demonize and invalidate a religious practice that detailed the birth, death, and regeneration cycle and the changing of the seasons. What did I say? According to Will Roscoe in Priests of the Goddess, Gender Transgression in Ancient Religion, Christian apologists cited the Galli as representative of all they abhorred in pagan culture and religion. The Galli transgressed the boundaries of gender, worshipped the mother goddess, and chose to live their lives as women instead of men. Another important distinction in regard to Cybele and the Galli is that the cult of the goddess found its way into Roman culture and political activity. The Galli were first encountered and written about by the Romans in their campaigns into Asia Minor in 190 and 189 BCE. At that time, the Galli were fully functioning as officials and priests of an urban, developed, and theocratic city, making the development of cultural city centers as places for gender diversity. The Galli were such a common sight throughout the Roman Empire that their presence can be found and seen in various texts from Ovid, Seneca, and more. Her significance in the lives and hearts of worshippers across the ancient world, coupled with her devotees who pushed the boundaries of normal gender distinctions, would prove to be a dangerous obstacle for patriarchal societies to come. Oh, so we were thriving. Got it. So here's some examples. Look. Tambourine. You can see here that there are no breasts, but dress in the headdress of a priestess. See some other objects here, right? I'll just have you pay attention to some of the iconography, right? We see a tiny woman here, little woman down there, right? Here's another, here's the goddess. Yeah, I'm just showing you some images, that's all. Showing you some images. Okay, moving on to Sumer. So, traveling across the continent to the ancient Near East, we arrive in the lands of Mesopotamia, Sumer, and Babylonia. Here we encounter the Kurgara and the Galator, or the Pili Pili, which is really fun to say. Ilan Peled recounts the creation of two gender-fluid beings in the goddess Inanna's descent into the underworld in Kula Utam Epeshum, so sorry, Gender Ambiguity and Contempt in Mesopotamia. Inanna, after descending into the underworld, is killed and must be reborn in, you guessed it, 3 days. In order to ensure her body can be retrieved, the god Enki creates a special being which he sends to retrieve and rescue the goddess. Here we are. So, Enheduanna is the first poet whose name we know. She is the first to claim authorship over her exaltations, lamentations, and poems dedicated to the goddess Inanna. In Sophus Hell's 2023 translation of the complete poems of Enheduanna, he tells us that Enheduanna lived around 2300 BCE. She served as high priestess in Ur, a city nestled in the southernmost corner of what we now call Iraq. She was a daughter of King Sargon of Akkad and lived through a period of profound transformation. And I'm quoting, "The world she was born into was not the same as the one she left behind. Sargon founded the first empire that history had ever seen, and Enheduanna's installment as high priestess in Ur, one of the largest cities in the empire, was probably part of this political overhaul." Revolts were customary, and Enheduanna's poetry reflects the times she lived through. Her poems are hymns, exaltations, and battle cries. Her hymns hold power, persuasion, and are means of defending oneself against the mood swings of the gods. Enheduanna's poetry gives us a glimpse into the past and into the lives and beliefs of herself and her people. In the Hymn to Inanna, Enheduanna qualifies the mighty powers of Inanna. She also makes note of the transformative powers of the goddess in verse 80 when she says, "She set a great burden on their body, blessed them, and named them the Pili Pili. She snapped a spear and gave it to them as if they were men. And later," she says, "to turn men into women, to turn women into men are yours, Inanna." There are also references to the goddess being able to transform herself into a man when the need arose, particularly when she entered the battlefield and destroyed mountains. Yes. Or did I mention this before? Let me double check, everyone. Yeah. Isn't that beautiful? I want to say it again. She set a great burden on their body, blessed them, and named them the Pili Pili. She snapped a spear and gave it to them as if they were men. I wonder, and again, this is where another scholar can chime in, but she placed a great burden on their body. A penis? Question mark? It would indeed be a great burden. Okay, so we have more evidence to support this claim from writings. So evidence of paradoxical existences, gender transgression, and professional gender fluid religious attendance aside, the ancient worlds of the Near East are not without conflict regarding gender. During the 12th century BCE, the Assyrian king Ninurta Tukulti Ashur was usurped by his own brother, Mutakil Nusku. Doing my best. The former king sought refuge in Babylonia. In a letter addressed to Mutakil Nusku, the author spoke of his brother in a poor light, stating that the former king is a kulau, or kugara, and not a real man. Peled believes that in this context, being transgender was an insult, an antonym of manliness and masculine conduct, as used by the author in order to ridicule the king's brother. This notion that to be transgender was an assault on masculinity would become more prominent as patriarchal warring societies continued to spread across the globe, bringing their patriarchal religious and cultural beliefs with them. So, who are the additional Reed Marsh people? Dun dun dun. Turning to, yes, the Bible now, and additional instances of gender transgression and fluidity. So we see we have that. I don't have notes for the rest for this portion, so I'm just going to hope I remember everything. We have this quote from Enheduanna. And then we also have these two she changed. She says this later. Renamed them Reed Marsh Woman and Reed Marsh Man. Ordained sacred attendants of ecstasy and trance. The head overturned, Pili Pili. The chief hero, Kurgara. So Frodo Okolam introduced me to this idea of the Reed Marsh people in relation to Jesus and Moses and the Bible. And they say the crossing over between genders allows the Galator and Kurgara to more easily cross between worlds and states of being, between life and death, ecstasy and lamentation. And I think it's so beautiful based on everything we've seen so far. So the Reed Marsh people and the Bible. This is an image from the Jordan River. So they are known as the Reed Marsh people because the Reed Marsh is also a liminal space. It's between water and dry land. It exists in between. In between. Okay, creation. So the biblical book of Genesis says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on earth." But let's look at some of the language and some of the translation as language of the language. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, I am relying on the translation of other people. And people have preferences and agendas of all kind, right? All right. Before someone goes, well, how do you? Okay, well, how come every other thing you read says this other thing? Ask yourself that first. Anyway, Adam or Adama in Hebrew, meaning soil or earth given to God's creation, human. Eve or Hava, Hebrew, to breathe, living. God breathed life into the soil, right? Okay. Transformation. It's always there, it's always there, it's always there, right? Human, breathing life, not necessarily man, woman, Adam, Eve, life, soil, transformation. Exodus 2. Moses is hidden in a basket among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister Miriam watches over the transformation. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. Moses, Galatur, Miriam, Kurgara. There is a priestess presiding over the transformation, the head overturned in the reeds. Moses parts the Reed Sea, the Red Sea, and leads the people to freedom. He is able to do this transformation, the going through the liminal space. You're gonna have to get a little abstract with me here, okay? The Reed Sea. In the Exodus narrative, Yam Suf, Hebrew, Romanized Yam Sup, Reed Sea is a literal translation. Or Red Sea, Reed Sea, sometimes translated as Sea of Reeds, is the body of water which the Israelites crossed following their exodus from Egypt. The same phrase appears in over 20 other places in the Hebrew Bible. This has traditionally been interpreted as referring to the Red Sea following the Greek Septuagint's rendering of the phrase. I'm sorry, pronunciation. Song of the Sea. Oh, look what they're holding. Tambourines. Oh, look what we've got down here. A procession of sound, a cacophony of sound. So Exodus 15, Miriam and the Israelite women sing a song of victory. Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, picked up a hand drum, and all the women went out after her and danced with hand drums, and Miriam chanted for them. And Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. So again, we have a procession, a cacophony of sound, being led by a priestess of sorts in a procession. The Last Supper. Luke 22:10, as you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters. The Essenes, or the gate of the Essenes in Jerusalem. A man walking around with a jar of water was a very unusual sight, as this was ordinarily women's work. The only group of Jewish men that traditionally did carry water jars were the Essenes. Essenes were mostly celibate, and their men did women's work, and they had their own communities. I'm not going to say anything to that. I'm going to let your mind do what it needs to do. Okay? John the Baptist and Jesus. So, Christian scriptures, the wilderness of the Jordan River with John the Baptist. John is a counterculture figure. Camel hair clothes, eats locusts and wild honey. He lives on the outskirts of the city. Jesus undergoes the head overturned rite mentioned by Enheduanna, and the symbol of the goddess Asherah comes to him in the form of a dove. Ruach, Hebrew feminine word for spirit or wind. Only after receiving the head overturned rite in the waters does Jesus begin his ministry. There you can see it. Asherah. In the Ugaritic texts, early cuneiform texts that reveal the mythology of early Canaanite peoples, the cult of Yahweh and Asherah can be found. Asherah is associated with the white dove. She is also known to walk on water about 1400 years before Jesus did so. Jesus was a priestess/priestess/galator of the goddess Asherah. It says she is pleased. Jesus is an embodiment of the goddess. He enters his liminal space where he is transformed, and all of his other mysteries and rites have this feminine mystery connotation that exists. Asherah's Ugaritic epithets include Lady who treads on the sea, Lady Asherah of the sea, Goddess of the sea. In Genesis, Noah releases a dove to find land. It brings back the branch of an olive tree. Asherah is associated with the olive tree and Asherah pole. Are we getting it? Are we getting it? Are we getting it? Are we seeing it? An Asherah pole is a sacred tree or pole that stood near a Canaanite altar or ritual space. Ancient texts speak of Yahweh casting aside his consort or wife, Asherah, and abusing her and her children. Exodus 34:13. Rather, you must tear down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and chop down their Asherah poles. I always like to say this, that the Bible never says there are no other gods than me. It says you shall not worship any. Chop down their Asherah poles. Deuteronomy 7:5. Instead, this is what you are to do to them. Tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire. You shall not plant for yourself an Asherah of any kind of tree beside the altar of the Lord your God, which you shall make for yourself. Do not plant for yourself a grove of any tree on the side of the altar of Lord Jehovah your God, which you shall make for yourself. I want to bring this back. When you think of the destroying of the olive trees and groves in Palestine, when you think of the violence, when you think of how we do not care about murdering women and children, about slaughtering people who live outside of society's ideas of acceptable gender norms, I want you to think what they have done to us from a sacred, spiritual, religious, matrilineal, goddess-focused standpoint. Look what they have done to us. The mysteries were always there. They were always there, and they still are. So, according to an article published on March 28, 2023, by the Rolling Stone, former Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson believes that the trans movement is targeting Christians. Nikki McCann Ramirez, author of this article, writes that, quote, "The extended segment labeling transgender people as a natural enemy of Christianity came the day after a shooter, who police identified as transgender, shot and killed 6 people, including 3 children, at a private Christian school in Nashville, Tennessee." In an impassioned monologue, Carlson told viewers that the trans movement is a mirror image of Christianity and therefore its natural enemy. Carlson isn't the only right-wing Christian political figure who has positioned transgenderism as the antithesis of Christianity and therefore evil and unnatural. The irony here, after listening to this presentation, should be apparent. How, unfortunately, the lack of knowledge and awareness around gender transgression in history and in our most sacred religious texts leads to feelings of bigotry, hatred, and prejudice. Hence why reading and studying this shit is important. In the ancient religious world, transgender people were sacred beings that navigated the liminal spaces between lamentation and ecstasy. They created liminal spaces of consciousness where normal distinction, including gender and gender performances, are suspended and done away with. They usher in praises of the goddess through a procession of wild and frenzied celebration and lamentation as seen in the frescoes of Crete, described by ancient onlookers in Phrygia and exclaimed by Enheduanna when calling upon Inanna. They play instruments, dance, and sing. This desire for a full embodied expression of self can be understood through the lens of repression in modern society. When I contemplate the conservative patriarchal religious doctrines of today's age, I find that even myself, as a cisgendered woman, feel I do not have the permission to express every corner of my nature. The male divinity-centered religious practices of the 21st century feel limited in their ability to encompass all aspects of human life, death, and regeneration in the way that the cultic worship of the Great Mother did. The power and persuasion of gender transgression that allowed worshippers to become reunified with the Mother by transforming their bodies to mirror that of the goddess would be considered radical in today's society. But radical might be what we need, baby. In an article published in The Guardian in 2022, Sam Levin states that more than 50% of trans and non-binary children in the United States contemplated suicide. The Trevor Noah Project released statistics stating, quote, 34,000 queer and trans youth ages 13 to 24 showed alarmingly high rates of suicide attempts, depression, and anxiety across liberal and conservative regions. In a 2023 survey, the Trevor Project reported that nearly 1 in 3 LGBTQ young people said that their mental health was poor most of the time or always due to anti-LGBTQ policies and legislation, and nearly 2 in 3 LGBTQ young people said that hearing about potential state or local laws banning them from discussing LGBTQ people at school made their mental health a lot worse. Additionally, PBS reported that in 2022, at least 32 transgender people were killed in the United States alone. But what would happen if we remembered, if we unearthed, if we held ourselves sacred, if we dared to step into the full expression of ourselves? People watching others be unapologetically free in their expression can be frightening and unnerving for many. But what many people consider to be new and alternative in regard to gender expression is actually ancient and sacred. If we can remember our ancient origins, our sacred lineages, and our connection to the goddess, then we will remember that transgender people have always been here and will always be here. By remembering our past, before the impact of patriarchy, male-centered religions, and colonization, we can act to decolonize our religious spaces by making room for people of all gender expressions and variants. I will leave you, with a question posed by Zen Dao. Is transgender identity a perversion on normalcy, or is normalcy a perversion on the natural variety of the soul? Thank you. So, that's my presentation. It's a lot of information in a really short amount of time. Again, I am not an ancient Greek scholar, for example, a biblical scholar. That's not my focus. My focus is on the signs and the symbols and the women's mysteries and how women have been eradicated in a shit ton of major religious, spiritual, philosophical traditions throughout the world. It sounds really broad, but it's really not. It's really not. It's easy to start to follow the dots and reweave the threads once you know what you're looking for. And I hope that this was just a little teaser, a little taster into what you yourself can go and look for and find. And I hope, if nothing else, you remember that you are beautiful and you are sacred and you are needed and you are worthy and you have always existed and you will always exist beyond what they are trying to do to us. Send this video to your friends, like, subscribe, comment, share your own wisdom, share your own learnings. Bigotry will be blocked. It'll be blocked and deleted, so go waste your time doing something else. Love you. Bye.